Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeak.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what's up? Welcome to the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast, where we try to make your fantasy decisions just a little bit easier. Last week we did Super Bowl prop bets and the XFL rule changes. I hit on my Travis Kelce, Damian Williams, and Patrick Mahomes props, but none of my 49er props hit. So not the best Super Bowl for me, but it was still an entertaining game. It was still a lot of fun. And I have a feeling we're going to see the Chiefs back in at least one more Super Bowl before Mr. Patrick Mahomes is done. So on this episode, we're going to preview the XFL season. We're going to run through the coaches of these 8 teams and kind of go through their offensive philosophies, try and get a gauge on what to expect from these offenses and from the league as a whole. If you missed last week, I highly recommend you go back and check out the last 5 or 6 minutes because there are a lot of rule changes. Some of them are pretty significant. This should be a league with a lot of scoring and a lot of excitement. They they replaced like extra points for 3 different options as far as scoring after a touchdown. The kickoffs and the punts are different. They got this comeback period now, and the clock is different too. There's a lot to it. So I'd go back, check it out. It should be fun. So let's get into these coaches here. With the New York Guardians, we got Kevin Gilbride, who's most known for his run and shoot with the Oilers and Warren Moon when he was calling plays back in the 90s. The run and shoot system, it emphasizes wide receiver motions and on-the-fly adjustments of the receivers and their routes depending on what the defense is doing. So he also won 2 Super Bowls as the offensive coordinator with the Giants and Eli Manning, running a vertically oriented scheme where it was a lot of 5 and 7 step drops. The play action game was designed to attack the deep part of the field. They're not just dinking and dunking off the play action. They're attacking down the field. Another thing Gilbride did was he added option routes for every single receiver on every single pass play. So basically allowing the wide receivers to adjust their routes depending on what coverage the defense is playing, what the defense's alignment is for that play. So obviously this system requires a lot of chemistry between the quarterback and his wide receivers. So you got to figure that Gilbride's going to really rely on the veteran quarterback that he has there, Matt McGloin. 7 starts for the Oakland Raiders from 2013 to 2016, and a wide receiver group of D'Angelo Yancey, who the Guardians selected first in their skill position draft. Polished route runner, excellent hands. Mikhail McKay, a.k.a. the big play McKay. He should be a dominant force in the red zone. He's a former basketball player, 4 touchdowns in his 8 AAF games. Tanner Gentry, who was one of Josh Allen's favorite targets in Wyoming, especially a deep target. And DeMarcus Ayers, who should be the team's primary slot receiver and kind of gadget player, which in this league I'm sure we're going to see a couple gadget plays at least every single week. The next one, June Jones with the Houston Roughnecks. Jones also will run the run and shoot system. He's been doing this since he was the quarterback at Portland State in the mid-'70s. From his time as a quarterback coach for the Oilers to his days at Hawaii and SMU, Jones has made some changes to the run and shoot, most notably implementing the shotgun and putting the running back offset instead of sitting behind the quarterback. His offenses rarely run the ball, so I'm definitely going to avoid the roughneck running backs in XFL Fantasy. One thing I think both of the running back groups for the Guardians and the Roughnecks is they're going to have to be able to pass protect. If they can't pass block, they're not going to stay on the field. It's that simple. Bob Shoop's probably one of the biggest names as far as the coaching goes with the Dallas Renegades. He's going to have his boy, Hal Mumm, the offensive coordinator. They're running their air raid system that helped popularize, with Mike Leach and Sonny Dykes. It is also a variation of the run and shoot, basically, which will heavily focus on the pass. So another team that's probably not going to run the ball as much. Some aspects of the air raid that differ from the run and shoot are basically the quarterback's freedom to audible to any play based on the defense. They use the no huddle, and the offensive linemen, their splits are wider. You see the offensive line kind of spread out a little bit more, which in theory is supposed to give the QB wider passing lanes and make those defensive linemen work just a little bit harder in pursuing the quarterback. Stoops and Mumm are fortunate to have a QB that they worked with in the past, Landry Jones, with Oklahoma, and they got some of the fastest wide receivers in the XFL with Jeff Badett and Stacy Collie and Jazz Ferguson, who I'm excited about. This dude could be a freak. All right, next, Jonathan Hayes with the St. Louis Battlehawks. Former TCU and Kansas offensive coordinator Doug Meacham was originally supposed to bring the air raid system to St. Louis, but January 11th he was replaced by Chuck Long, who coached the quarterbacks under Bob Stoops. So another air raid, another run and shoot. They're all going to be running very similar offenses here. He's probably going to run the most out of all these guys because of the running backs that he has. He has two of the most experienced running backs in the XFL with Matt Jones and Christian Michael, which we will get to in a little bit. Next, we got Winston Moss with the Los Angeles Wildcats. He's got Norm Chow calling plays for him as offensive coordinator. He's helped coach 8 of the top 14 career passing efficiency leaders and 13 quarterbacks who rank among the top 30 in NCAA history for single-season passing yardage. So this guy can coach quarterbacks. Jim McMahon, Steve Young, Phillip Rivers, Ty Detmer, Carson Palmer, Matt Leinart, the last of those 3 Heisman Trophy winners. He's going to run the West Coast system. And he's been involved in air raid systems, but I think this might be one of the more conservative offenses in the XFL. He's really big on time of possession and the turnover battle, which means a lot of checkdowns. So Wildcat quarterbacks will have, a lot of quick, 3-5-step drops, and they're going to need to be mobile. They're going to need to roll out, sprint out, bootlegs, play action. Also, the audibles in this system will be limited to just a pair of potential changes for each play. So each play, there's only going to be 2 potential audibles, whereas in some of the offenses that we've already talked about, they can pretty much audible to anything you want. So to me, look for the running back, Larry Ross III, who caught 55 passes for 522 yards his senior year at New Mexico State. He's going to be very involved in the pass game. He's going to be the outlet check-down guy. So I expect him to catch a lot of passes. Next, Mark Trussman with the Tampa Bay Vipers. Trussman is going to take his West Coast, fast-paced, multiple formations, constant motion, variety of personnel groupings. It should be pretty complex, quick rhythm passing. So the other thing that's really big for his offenses is a very diverse screen game. So he's going to get tight ends involved in the screen game, running backs, wide receivers, everybody. Go back and look at Matt Forte's 2013, 2014 seasons. The dude caught a lot of passes. Another really cool thing about this offense that I'm excited about is to see what Tressman and Quentin Flowers can do together. Flowers was drafted as a running back for the Vipers, but Tressman has said that he also plans on playing him at quarterback. So I wouldn't be surprised to see if this team utilizes the new double forward pass rule, considering how big the screen game is in Tressman's version of the West Coast offense. Next, Pep Hamilton with the DC Defenders. Pep has coordinated the offenses under David Shaw at Stanford and the Colts for Bruce Arians. He was lucky enough to coach Andrew Luck at both of his stops. He used his tight ends a lot at Stanford. He will most likely run more 2 tight end sets than anybody else in the XFL. I'm sure, though, that there will see plenty of aggressive play calls from him. he was asked in an interview about how he will coach the defenders' offense, and he said, attacking, fast-paced style. We're going to feature the playmakers that we have on this team. It sounds to me like the type of offense that's really going to funnel targets to just a few guys who are going to make plays, like we saw with the Panthers and the Chargers last year. If you go back and look at how many targets went to such a few amount of players. All right, and last we got Jim Zorn with the Seattle Dragons. Mike Riley will call plays for the Dragons. Most likely run his version of a pro-style offense, which is basically West Coast, short think and dunk, and then setting them up for long bombs down the field. His offenses have almost always resulted in more passing yards than rushing yards, although they have one of the most experienced backfields in the XFL. Jaquan Gardner, Trey Williams, Kenneth Farrell, all guys that have played before at the pro level. So speaking of that, we're going to get into our running backs here. So there's about 7 or 8 guys that played in the NFL that you're most likely going to recognize the names, and then there's about 7 or 8 guys that you might not recognize their names, but that you should know if you're going to be playing any kind of XFL fantasy, whether that's DFS or if you're able to put a league together. So the first one, most notable, most likely, Cameron Artis-Payne with the Renegades. Spent 4 years with the Panthers, caught 10 of 11 targets for 6 touchdowns, and he averaged 4.2 yards per carry on his 118 career carries. He scored 5 touchdowns, no fumbles, so he's probably going to be used a lot. Kenneth Farrell with the Dragons. He just had the 1 year with the Chargers, started 2 games, played in 13 of them, averaged 5.5 yards per reception. Only caught 13 passes and 3.2 yards per carry. He did have no touchdowns, but he had 2 fumbles. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play him, considering he's one of the more experienced guys in the league because he played in the NFL, but also he did have 2 fumbles in only 13 games played. So something to be concerned about. Christian Michael with the Battlehawks, 6 years in the NFL, drafted 62nd overall by the Seahawks in 2013. He was in both of the Seattle Super Bowls. He started 7 games in 2016 where he scored 7 touchdowns, put up 560 total yards, averaged 4.2 yards per touch. In 38 career NFL games, he had 2 100-yard rushing games. So that's pretty impressive to me. Anytime you can put up 100 yards in the NFL, it means you're doing something right. Another guy most notable with the Giants, Andre Williams. He's on the Roughnecks. Like I said, 4 years with the Giants and the Chargers. In his rookie year, he had 720 rushing yards with 7 touchdowns and another 130 receiving yards. So he was used in the passing game in actually Week 14, 2014, against the Titans. You go back and look at that game. He had 147 total yards on 24 carries, caught 3 passes for 50 yards and a touchdown. So he's got some explosiveness. Yes, that was 6 or 7 years ago, but we'll see what it looks like on the XFL field. Next, Matt Jones with the Battlehawks. Jones played 3 years in the NFL with the Washington Redskins. 2015 was his rookie year. He played 13 games. Finished with 800 total yards and 4 touchdowns, one of them receiving. Started 7 games in 2016, had 460 rushing yards, but then he got hurt, and he lost his job to Rob Kelly, if you remember Rob Kelly. Next is Dwan Harris with the Wildcats. Played for 4 different NFL teams in 38 career games. He averaged 4.1 yards per carry and scored 3 touchdowns. So he might be one of the older running backs in the XFL. And then last but not least, Lance Dunbar, 6 years in the NFL with the Dallas Cowboys, 5 of them with the Dallas Cowboys. 4.5 yards per carry on 100 career carries, 9.5 yards per reception. He will probably be one of the more targeted running backs in the XFL. The one thing for me, though, on 174 career touches, he only had 2 touchdowns, so I don't know how much I'm going to get behind him. Then the other guys that you may not know. Jarrell Presley, extremely elusive, tackle-breaking runner. DC's going to run the ball with him primarily, I would assume. Then you got Tim Cook with the New York Guardians. He's another bruiser, probably a short yardage goal line back. Him and, Devion Smith with the Vipers. These guys are probably going to most likely be just goal line backs. Trey Williams and Justin Stockton, two guys that are going to be very much involved in PPR leagues. Justin Stockton's kind of like poor man's Kenyon Drake. He has 4.3 speed, really good hands. And Trey Williams, like I say, he's probably going to catch a lot of passes. So there's one other guy, actually, and he did play in the NFL for a little bit, Donnell Pumphrey. He should also be very much involved in PPR leagues, probably going to catch a lot of passes. One other guy real quick, I already kind of mentioned him, but Larry Rose III, another guy that I think he's going to catch a lot of passes. I think that's going to be really big for these XFL running backs is how many passes are you catching? Because I don't know if there's going to be any more than maybe 3 to 5 guys that actually see, 15, 16 carries a game. I think they're just going to every team has 2 or 3 running backs. I think they're going to have to rotate. It's going to be a quicker game, so teams aren't going to be able to just sit back and run the ball. All right, moving on to the XFL wide receivers. So there's a handful of them that have NFL experience. You're talking about guys like Eli Rogers. Was an undrafted guy with the Steelers. In 2016, he finished with about 50 catches for 600 yards and 3 touchdowns. He was 10th that year amongst wide receivers with a 72.7% catch rate. So if he's got an accurate quarterback, he should catch plenty of passes. Terrence Williams started 68 games in 6 seasons with the Cowboys, caught 20 touchdowns, plus another 3 postseason touchdowns. In 2014, he averaged 14.5 yards per reception and 70% of his catches. Sammy Coates, another guy you might recognize. He started 6 games with the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns. He did catch less than half of his targets, though, so I'm not too big on that. And then probably one of the biggest names as far as wide receivers, or at least the guy that's getting a lot of attention, is Rashad Ross. Signed and waived from the practice squad of the Titans, the Chiefs, the Redskins, and the Bears between 2013 and 2014. He really jumped around. He earned a roster spot in 2015 after a really good preseason with the Redskins, 25 catches for 260 yards and 4 touchdowns. He had 284 return yards that season as the Redskins' primary kick returner. He scored 3 touchdowns that season, one 101-yard kick return. He blocked a punt and scored, and then he also caught a 71-yard reception in Week 17. So he joined the AAF's Arizona Hotshots, and when the season ended, he had the highest wide receiver grade from Pro Football Focus with 36 catches, about 600 yards, and 7 touchdowns in 8 games. So he stood out amongst all the other talent in the league as one of the better wide receivers. And then some guys that you may not be as familiar with, like I mentioned before, Mikael McKay played in 8 games with the San Antonio Commanders of the AAF, where he was targeted 22 times, 12 in the red zone, had 4 touchdowns. So one of every 3 targets was a touchdown. That's pretty good. Shantavius Jones played in 8 games with the Atlanta Legends. He only caught 24 of his 50 targets for 300 yards, but 9 of his 24 targets were in the red zone. Again, these guys, when you have that size and speed, I think they're going to be red zone monsters. Nelson Spruce played in all 8 games for the San Diego Fleet, including a 2-touchdown game and a 12-catch, 146-yard game. So he's proven that he can handle a big workload and a big target share. LaDamian Washington, after failing to make 7 different NFL teams, he signed with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers of the Canadian Football League, where he played 8 games, caught 24 passes, 2 touchdowns, 250 yards. Then he played for the Birmingham Iron of the AAF. He had 2 touchdowns there. One of them was in a 128-yard game where he had 191 air yards. So all these teams that are going to be bombing the ball down the field, this guy looks like he's one of the more proven deep targets. Another guy, Reese Horn, played with the Memphis Express. He missed the last game of the season, but the 2 games before that, he had 242 yards on 19 catches and 1 touchdown. Another guy, high-volume guy. We'll see if that kind of comes over to the XFL. And Jalen Saunders, in 2014, he returned 6 punts for 26 yards in 3 games with the Jets. Then for the Saints, he returned 3 kickoffs for 140 yards and 9 punts for 100 yards. In 2017, Saunders played in 16 games. He caught 76 passes for 1,170 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's been all over the place. He's done a lot. He's definitely one of the more experienced guys that you don't know, but you should know. He most likely will stand out because of his experience. And then another guy real quick, Keith Mumphrey. Played in 27 games for the Houston Texans from 2015 to 16. He caught 24 balls for 200 yards. He also a returner, 14 kick returns for 338 yards, 36 punt returns for 280 yards. So, like I was saying, you should go back. If you haven't, you should go back and listen to those rule changes from episode 1, because one of the big changes is the return game. They're setting it up so that we should see more returns. And these guys that have, experience returning the ball and they've shown that they can be trusted to do that job. Hopefully in your league you get points for return yards, and I think if you're setting up a league, you should definitely add that, because I think it's just going to give so many more players more value. It should be a big part of the game. All right, we got 10 minutes left in this podcast, so we're going to get through the quarterbacks and the tight ends worth note in this league here. So there's a couple big names, and then there's a couple guys that you probably haven't heard of, but to me, most notable is Cardell Jones. He may be one of the most talented quarterbacks in this league. He's got Pep Hamilton, who wants to throw the ball. And he's also got an added, because of his mobility. We saw what Lamar Jackson did this year in the NFL. Not trying to say Cardell Jones is Lamar Jackson, but a guy that has that kind of mobility, can extend drives, can get you easy points in the running game. Another guy, Josh Johnson with the Los Angeles Wildcats. Provided that Johnson can stay healthy, apparently he missed the last scrimmage. Veteran Johnson is an ideal spot with Norm Chow calling the offense, and he's got a really good set of wide receivers, and he also brings some added value as a runner. Then we got Landry Jones, who is not the most mobile guy, and he does not give you any extra value as a runner, but there's no arguments that he could be ranked number 1. He's got the experience with Bob Stoops and Hal Mumm running this air raid, and he also has a loaded wide receiving core. He should be fine. He most likely is going to miss the first or maybe even the first 2 games. He got injured a couple weeks ago. All right, then we got Matt McGloin with the New York Guardians. So this should be a very balanced team, very balanced attack. They got some good running backs. McGloin is a veteran, and Kevin Gilbride is going to put him in a good situation. I don't think Gilbride's going to ask too much of him. I think he's got a good gauge on quarterbacks, and then knows what they can do and what they can't do. So the one thing about him is, playing at MetLife Stadium, playing in the Northeast for the first, maybe month of the season. It's probably not going to be the greatest conditions, but again, he's a veteran. He should be okay. And you got guys like Phillip Walker, Connor Cook, and Brandon Silvers, and B.J. Daniels, all fighting for the quarterback spots for their teams. Aaron Murray is pretty much locked down as Mark Trestman's quarterback, so he could be an interesting late round guy. He's probably not going to. He might be the last quarterback drafted amongst the starters. But to me, there's this one interesting dude, and that's Quentin Flowers, who I think we actually passed over when talking about running backs. Sorry about that, but he was drafted as the running back, and he's going to get snaps at quarterback, and he could easily catch some passes as well. So he's kind of a triple threat player, and I kind of look at him as not in the same vein as Taysom Hill, but I think he's going to be on the field in as many different spots as Taysom Hill. I think he's not the worst guy to take as one of your backup quarterback, your third running back, backup quarterback, and just see what happens. And maybe you can just get away with streaming him if he's involved enough, giving you enough in the running game and catching the ball where, maybe he's only going to have 5, 6, maybe 10 pass attempts a game. could be somebody that's worth as a bench spot that could really bring your team some value. All right, and lastly, we got the tight ends here. So there's pretty much one tight end that stands out amongst all the others, and that's Nick Trosdale. Probably one of the most talented players in the XFL. He started at the University of Cincinnati, but he was dismissed from the team after stealing from the university bookstore. Then he transferred to the Grand Rapids Community College, and he tore his ACL in the first game. Kind of sucks, but he was invited to the rookie mini camps of the Bengals, the Titans, and the Packers, but he did not sign a contract with any of the three teams. In 2014, he played in 7 games of the Badajimi, I screwed that up, the Axemen in the Indoor Football League. He finished with 28 catches for 400 yards and 9 touchdowns. And then he moved to the Arena Football League, played in 3 seasons, 38 touchdowns in 3 seasons. In 2018, he played with the Salt Lake City Stallions of the AAF. In 8 games, caught 24 passes for 269 yards. He also had 3 touchdowns. He had a 89% catch rate, and I'm pretty sure he also led the tight ends in receiving yards in the league. So head coach Mark Trussman drafted him 5th overall in the skill position draft. So that should mean that he's going to be heavily involved. You don't take a guy first in this format of the draft unless you're gonna use the guy. So I think he should be the clear-cut number 1 tight end drafted. And if you're doing daily fantasy, I would assume he's going to end up being one of the more expensive guys, if not the most expensive guy, but he's probably going to be worth it because he's definitely going to get used. Again, another big red zone guy. All right, next we got Donald Parham. I'm screwing up a lot of these names. Sorry, folks. He's 6'8". He caught 85 balls for 1,320 yards and 13 touchdowns as a senior in college. If those stats don't speak for themselves, they don't scream out to you, big target running down the middle of the field, just outrunning linebackers and out jumping safeties down the seams and catching passes in the end zone. I think he should be another guy that, if for anything else, just his red zone value, should be one of the top tight ends. Then Kari Lee signed with the Texans as an undrafted free agent. Drafted by the Bears 2 years later. I'm sorry, he was traded to the Bears 2 years later for a 6th-round pick, and then he was waived. He was waived, but teams don't just trade away 6th-round picks for someone unless they think that they could possibly make the team. And on that team with all the speedy wide receivers and Pep Hamilton, he does love using tight ends. So that honestly is probably one of the biggest factors into his value. But again, he could be a monster in the middle of the field. Then you got E.J. Bibbs. So he won he was a finalist for the John Mackey Award in 2014, which goes to the best tight end in college football. He played in 7 games with the Browns in 2015. He also should benefit from another big group of talented wide receivers. So he should see a lot of easy targets with teams just playing back in zones and whatnot. You got Brandon Barnes, he's just got fantastic hands. If you go back and watch his highlight reel, he's made some pretty crazy catches in his college career. Evan Rodriguez, drafted in the 4th round by the Bears in 2012. He started in 5 of the 12 games that he played in, but only caught 4 passes. He played in the AAF, the San Antonio Commanders, where he only had 16 targets in 8 games. But again, 3 of them were in the red zone, and he converted 2 of them. So if this guy ends up being one of their easy red zone targets, it's another guy to keep an eye on. Someone else that should benefit from the coach that he plays with, Cole Hunt. He played for the Commanders of the AAF, but he only caught 2 of his 6 targets. Again, his value is with his new head coach who played tight end in the NFL, and he coached guys like Tyler Eifert when he was with the Bengals. You got Connor Davis, another guy that's 6'8", big target, red zone guy. And if Matt Jones and Christine Michael can establish the run, usually you see tight ends benefit the most on the play action, especially with some lesser experienced quarterbacks. Easy throws right there to the tight end. They're big guys right in the middle of the field. another guy, Sean Price. He set records at the UCF with 75 catches for 900 yards, but he's most likely going to split snaps with Donald Parham in the Renegades air raid offense. That actually, they lean a lot more on their wide receivers than they do their tight ends. And then lastly, you got Adrian Robertson, who only caught 7 passes in 5 games with the Memphis Express, but he could also benefit in playing for Pep Hamilton, who has a history of using his tight ends a lot. So that's going to do it for the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Hopefully that quick little half hour can give you guys enough knowledge about what to expect in the XFL and some names to be aware of. So if you do end up putting in a roster on DraftKings or FanDuel, if you're setting up a league, have some fun. It's a quick little 10-week season. Nice little hangover cure to no NFL. So thanks for tuning in. As always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin' or Stickin' is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin' or Stickin' is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin' or Stickin' Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.